This is Pastor Micah from Life's Journey United Church of Christ. So good to have each of you joining us here um, as we pause, find some center in the middle of our weeks. This past Sunday, we explored the challenge of listening for God in our daily lives, looking at lessons we can glean about the life of the prophet Samuel. This coming week, we're going to look at God's choosing of David to be the leader whose kingship united a divided Israel. God calling David comes to everyone's great surprise because, as a young man, as a short man, as a man who doesn't appear particularly strong or outspoken, they don't see in David what God sees. The story reminds us that to not judge by or high calling, but rather to remember the Lord doesn't see things the way people judge by appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. I want to take a second in our midweek reflection time to think about what it means to be a person after God's own heart. First of all, being a person after God's own heart does not mean being perfect. If you take a chance to study the life of David in 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings, you'll find David is someone with his share of mistakes. Some are small, but some are truly heartbreaking to him and others. Some end up damaging others' lives in irreparable ways. Some cost others deeply. Some cost him and his country in ways that leave a legacy of pain. David is not a perfect man. Sometimes he's not a particularly good man. He can be a screw up. He can be a failure. And even once or twice, if you really pay attention to the story and what it says, you'll find in our day and age, he would have been counted as a criminal, locked up for years. David is not perfect. And yet, God sees through all of that into his heart, sees beyond his mistakes, beyond his failures and shortcomings, beyond how others might view him. And what God sees there, kind of heart that God uses to bless the world. And we need to cultivate that kind of heart. How do we do so? I want to take a second during our time to talk about what it means to be a person after God's own heart. First of all, being a person after God's heart um, means we have to connect with our heart. One of my heroes, the late Henry Nouwen, whose life as a gay man who was also a Catholic priest, counselor, scholar, we studied during LGBT Pride Month at church. Nouwen describes the heart God looks for this way. In the biblical understanding, he writes, our heart is at the center of our being. It's not a muscle, but a symbol for the very center of our being. Now, the beautiful thing about the heart is that it is the place we are ourselves. It is the very core of our being, the spiritual center of our being. Solitude, silence, for instance, ways to get to the heart, because the heart is the place where God speaks to us, where we hear the voice that calls us each beloved. This is precisely the most intimate place. In the famous story, Elijah was standing in front of the cave. God was not in the storm. God was not in the fire and not in the earthquake. God was in that soft little voice. That soft little voice is what speaks to the heart. Prayer and solitude are ways to listen for the voice that speaks to our heart in the center of our being. One of the most amazing things is that if you enter deeper and deeper into that place, you not only meet God, but you meet the whole world there. That image Noun gives from Elisha of finding and connecting with our heart and from our heart, that it's like going to a cave when surrounded by the earthquake, the fire, and the storm. Hear the quiet whisper of God's voice is so instructive when we think about what it means to truly be people after God's heart. I can't speak for you. Last several months, I have been struggling to find that quiet place within. As I say at church, I know some of you are better Christians than I, but I'm just speaking the truth. Sometimes I let the hustle and bustle of my day, my main two jobs, one of which is pastoring, which I'm doing right now, my trying to show up for friends and family, my working on my relationship with my partner while we are engaged, while she and I plan coming June. I let all of this keep me so busy that sometimes I don't take the time to quiet my heart and listen to what my own heart is saying like I should, let alone listen for God. Yet when I do so, I find strength and peace. I remember that God is with me. I remember I'm not alone in all I'm facing and joys alike. To have a heart after God's own, we have to cultivate time to connect with God in our deepest heart. And I want to challenge you all to do this. This might be just taking time, maybe 5 minutes or so, whether through to meditate, whether that's through listening to your own breath, it's a kind of meditation, meditating on a verse of scripture, one word, time, which I've shared as a form of that. We're doing yoga. In my notes here, I put doing Yoda. I'm not sure what that would be, being green and short, but doing yoga. I mean, it might mean finding time when taking a walk or driving a car to pray rather than to worry. And by pray, I mean they're talking to God as if a friend, while pausing and paying attention here and there for what feelings or thoughts God might put on your heart in response. This is not just about time, though. It's also about openness. You know, if I'm honest, a lot of times I have to try to pray and meditate lately. I've got so very much on my mind, so many worries, so many tasks to be done, that I truly do feel like Elijah surrounded by the storm, the quake, and the fire. I have to listen through the noise. I have to reach through it and touch my own heart. Let myself feel what is beneath to ever truly connect with God and what God is saying. The Dalai Lama, speaking from a Buddhist rather than a Christian perspective, talks about this work of facing into and making peace with we have faced and what we feel in his book, The Book of Joy, Lasting Happiness in a Changing World. Adversity, illness, and death are real and inevitable, he writes. We choose whether to add to those unavoidable facts of life with the suffering that we create in our own hearts, our chosen suffering. The more we make a different choice to heal our own suffering, the more we can turn to others and help address their suffering. With laughter filled, tear stained eyes of the heart. And the more we turn away from our self regard to wipe the tears from the eyes of others, the more, incredibly, we are able to hear, heal, and transcend their own suffering. This is the secret, the true secret to joy. Some weeks ago, I mentioned the book Rising Strong by Brene Brown. in which she talks of the process we go through when we face adversity, loss, and even face seeming failure to begin again. And I mentioned that we are in what she calls the messy middle, that point where we are just starting to recover after falling down or struggling, but not quite on our feet yet. In so many parts of our lives, individually, and our life together as a church. This sitting with our feelings and experiences to connect with our hearts, and through connecting with our hearts to connect with God, which I'm describing, is a part of how we engage in the work she talks about in this book. She says those who can begin again and thrive after loss learn the art of reckoning, rumbling, and revolution. To reckon is to face head on what it is you struggle with. To rumble is to really sit with your emotions, your questions, your fears, and face what lessons they give you. And if you both reckon and rumble, it can lead you to a revolution of the heart where you change your attitude, your game plan, your approach in ways that open you up to new possibilities. By tending to our hearts, we reckon and we rumble and open ourselves up to the revolutions we are called to live into. Let's take time, not only in these days before we join in worship together on Sunday, but every day to connect with our heart, our deepest selves. And in so doing, open ourselves up to God's guiding hand. Like David, let's become ones after God's own heart, ones whose hearts shine, ones who, because of this soul work, to love and serve as God has called us to. I'll see you all this coming Sunday. God bless.